All right.
All right. So, like I was saying, unless there's anything else or any other idea you had, maybe we could start out with you and then move on to
Yeah.
me and kind of intermingle things. Don't be weird about it, but yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Sounds good to me.
Okay. Okay. So, where do you live? Where, like, how old are you? How'd you grow up? That kind of thing. Like,
Okay.
I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know that much about you, so just
Yeah.
start very basic, I guess.
Just starting. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yes. So just in terms of right now, I'm 17, senior in high school. I live in Bellingham, Washington State, which is about
Yeah, I know where
uh
Bellingham is. Yeah, I know
okay,
exactly where
got
that
it.
is. Yeah.
Okay, got it. And then so but I go to high school in Linden, if you know where that is.
My cousins and aunt and uncle live around that area,
Okay,
in Ferndale, so I kind of know. Yeah, I've heard of Linden. I don't
okay,
remember it, but yeah.
got it. Okay, so I go to school in Linden, and just in a side on Linden, Linden's really interesting because it's a Dutch transplant community.
Hmm.
Um, or yeah, it became that predominantly. And so the private Christian school I go to is very heavily based on CRC doctrine historically.
Hmm.
And so that's sort of the tradition that a lot of the teachers come out of. But now coming back to young me.
Mm-hmm.
So I was born on Guam,
Hmm.
which is a cool place to be born. My dad owns a he owns an emissions testing business, so testing smokestacks, stuff like that. And he's done a lot of work throughout the Pacific Rim. And he met my mom in the Philippines.
Okay.
My mom's from the Philippines, has family there, and so for the first 3 years of my life, we bounced between Guam, the Philippines, and Bellingham, because my dad's
Hmm.
from um he's from Issaquah, which is 2 hours south of Bellingham, originally. And my grandpa, and my grandma lived there at the time. And so we bounced through there for 3 years. And when I was three, um, I had a seizure on one of the airplane flights.
Hmm.
And so after that, I was diagnosed with cerebral palsy and epilepsy.
Okay.
And they traced that back to um, some birth trauma me and my mom went through. I was a C-section, and
Okay.
I suffered asphyxiation
Okay.
for a while and had to go on life support.
Hmm.
So that caused some spinal damage that screwed some things up. And so it's a mild case. It's not that bad. A
Okay.
bit of a speech impediment, obviously, and
Hmm.
and some like fine and gross motor control
Hmm.
got impaired. But besides that, nothing too harsh. And so after that, um we realized that or my parents realized that we needed a support structure of therapists and doctors and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And Washington State was like the best place for that out of the three. And so so we settled in Bellingham when I was about 4 or 5. And
Okay.
so yeah. And so when I moved to Bellingham, I started going to the public schools. Um I did that for preschool and kindergarten. And then apparently I had some problems with bullying,
Hmm.
um, which is a really interesting thing in my mind. And like, of course, when you get back to this age, gets too hard to tell what's real and what's fake. But like my remembrance of things is that like, yeah, there was some bullying, but I feel like I exaggerated it a lot
Mm,
just because I didn't like the school
mm-hmm.
itself for arbitrary reasons that 5-year-olds don't like schools for, whatever they are.
Yeah.
But so after kindergarten, I got moved to a Montessori private school. And I went there until 3rd grade. The school was having some internal troubles, and so it was sort of falling apart. It closed a year after I left, and then I went into a private Christian school in Bellingham, so not the language, in Oregon. And it was a really interesting experience going into there because my parents are not religious. They don't practice religion.
Okay.
My mom grew up Catholic, although she just stopped attending as she got older.
Mhm.
And then my dad is a bizarre person in terms of trying to categorize him religiously. He grew up going to like Christian summer camps and stuff like that, so he has a pretty good knowledge of it.
Mhm.
But I haven't really sat down with him and gotten into the weeds of how that developed throughout his life. So
Mhm.
he got into a lot of different traditions, probably was into drugs, I'm guessing, probably psychedelics. I wouldn't be surprised. So it's like the Celestine prophecy is something he was into
Mhm.
for a while, if you know that.
Mhm.
Buddhism. So he's a bizarre mix of things. But
Okay.
he's also very scientific as well.
Mm.
New atheist strand-ish, but not.
Okay.
Um he was scientific in the sense that he gave me a love for science when I was growing up. So I
Okay.
wanted to be an astronomer when I was younger,
Mm.
but also to books on that sort of stuff. We would talk about evolution and the Big Bang, and we would just revel in these big ideas about the universe.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's what I came in with to this Christian school. And the school it's not denominational, but it has a Baptist background.
Okay. Yeah.
But, like, so I came in and like all of my peers were lovely. Like they were all super nice to me.
Mm.
I dealt with some bullying back in the Montessori school, so it was really refreshing to just be embraced by a community from the get-go.
Right.
But like the first unit we did in whatever Bible class it was making, we were split into groups and then we were assigned a day of creation and we had to make a poster on it. And coming in with evolution in my mind, I'm like, what the heck is going on here? And then they would pray after like before every class at lunch and all of
Mhm.
this, and we do chapel and sing worship songs. And I thought it was all ridiculous. I remember writing in my Bible, remind parents to pull me out of the school because I thought it was so ridiculous. And like at the end of that unit, I still have the Bible somewhere, but I ripped out Genesis 1 and 2,
Oh, yeah.
and 3, because I thought just get rid of this thing. Um, and so that was my introduction to Christianity. It was
Huh.
as a 4th grader thinking it was all ridiculous,
Right.
and then but somehow so my parents said, no, you're gonna stick it out because this is a good school
Mhm.
and it really works for us. and you're going to say it no matter what. And they didn't care either way with religion. So I stuck in there, and the way I say it when I'm giving testimony is that like Christ slowly wore down my heart.
Mm.
And so beginning in the 6th grade, so 2 years after this,
Mhm.
I have been wrestling with the creationism issue for that long 2-year time. But just something about the story of Christ was really compelling to me, and
Mm.
something about the salvation narrative. And so we went on a retreat. This actually is quite an interesting connection now that I think of it. So we would go on retreats to I think the camp is called like Lakeside Bible Camp, which
Okay.
I just now realize is the camp that my dad went to when he was a kid.
Hmm.
So that's an interesting connection. But so 6th grade, I went there, and after like the second night, I had a conversion experience. Like after quite a small group time, I took my Bible, a new Bible,
Mhm.
opened it to Genesis 1, and went into my counselor's room in tears and laid down the Bible and said, I want to become a Christian, but I don't know what to do with Genesis. Right?
Mm. Mhm.
And whatever he said convinced me to put that tension aside and embrace Christ as my savior.
Mhm.
So that was a very special day.
Mm.
And then for the remainder um, of my middle school years, those are probably the best years of my faith so
Mm.
far. My class was amazing in terms of relationship and in terms of building up your faith as well. So
Mhm.
that was amazing. And it wasn't until like late freshman year,
Mhm.
so I had graduated from Bellingham Christian, started going to that school in Linden. Um, and like late freshman year, I started getting into YouTube,
Okay.
and that's where I ran into Sam Harris,
Mm.
um, some minor league um new atheists, which is kind of funny, like Bill Nye. Funnily enough, Bill
Yeah.
Nye did a debate with Ken Ham.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so that really like that all made the Genesis issue resurface, and then Sam Harris threw all of the standard new atheist objections on top
Mhm.
of that, and then that sort of climaxed in the beginning of my sophomore year.
Mm.
And going into sophomore year, I was like, okay, these are serious challenges to my current worldview. How am I going
Mhm.
to deal with this? And it was around the beginning of sophomore year that I found Jordan Peterson.
Mm.
Um, and so I watched his political stuff first, and then got into the biblical series.
Mhm.
Um, I was making slow progress on it initially, but in my sophomore year, I was taking a Bible class. It's a Bible history class at my school, and the previous teacher for that class had left, and they couldn't find a replacement. So there's a temp in there, whose name is Clay Leibold. Now, Dr. Leibold had been a CRC pastor for 40 years, but had done a doctorate in Old Testament history at Calvin Oh no, he did the doctorate at Michigan that came out of Calvin for his bachelor's degree. And so he knew his stuff. He was really sharp, and he was very different from the teachers I had had previously, who came out of a more fundamentalist perspective. And so I was watching Jordan Peterson while taking his class, and things were lining up in terms of just maybe like looking at the Bible from a historical perspective and not just like glossing over things. It's like something you can do as a Christian. And so I emailed him and told him I was listening to Jordan Peterson and sent him the biblical series, and we dialogued about that for a while. And then about a month after that initial email, he sent me Paul Vanderclay's conversation with Rebel Wisdom. And he said, this guy is really taken with Peterson. He presents a Christian perspective on that, so you might want to take a look at this. And so that's how I got into Paul. It took me a while, but I only got into Paul after I watched the Sam and then got hooked by Paul's commentary on those. And then I just started consuming Paul so much. And that Paul mainly, but also Dr. Leibel, just really destroyed the credibility of the new atheist arguments. I always say that destroying was perspectival in nature, because I didn't exactly grasp, like I can't defend why I was rejecting new atheism completely in the propositional realm, but I definitely knew that that was not a stable foundation to build my worldview on. And so I decided I was going to continue with Christianity. And then when I found Peugeot, like my confidence in that built tremendously. Just seeing the rich tradition behind Christianity, and knowing that there was something behind it besides just what Ken Ham was saying,
right?
And so that I've sort of cemented myself more and more in church as a result of that. After that, so I got way more. I was going to church on and off, because my parents don't go, so like I have to get up, and like I used to have to like have my mom drive me there. But I've really gotten more involved since then, and I've just been really intellectually stimulated by like engaging with Viveki and all of those lights in exploring the internet, and of course there's been other things, but that's mainly what I've been up to.
Well,
so
that's really cool. So do you have any siblings, or
no? I'm the only child.
Okay.
It can be a bit depressing sometimes. I'm right in the middle of the introvert extrovert distribution, so I can vibe either way. So I make it by.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, that's really interesting. Especially interesting to me that you found Paul Vanderklay, I would say, kind of early on. You know, you said in your sophomore year, so that would be 2 years ago.
So that was in 2019.
Yeah, that's pretty. I mean, for I would say people who know about Paul Vanderklay, that's kind of early.
Yeah. He probably had 10,000 subs by then.
Right.
Half as many as now.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's really cool. So, like, what do you do now with the Genesis 1, 2, and 3. Are you still like working on
Mhm.
that? Is that like an ever current problem? I don't know if I should say problem, but like I don't know. Like, do you still like think about that still?
N- not in the existential way that I was before. Like, I'm
Mhm.
pretty settled on it. Like, so another podcast that was helping me out during that time period was the liturgists, if you know them.
Mm-mm.
So they're
Wittergist?
the it's like, let's see, I have a hard time with my L's.
Is it a
So
W or an L?
it's an L.
Okay,
So
then no, no.
yeah, liturgists, yeah.
Okay.
They're very far left evangelical,
Mm.
and so they have a lot of ideas that are just not useful at all. But they have a podcast on creationism that was like way back when that was relevant, and so I listened to that, and that sort of broke me out of the spell of creationism and said, if you have to read the text, it's very hard to defend a creationist view. Genesis 1 is separate from 2 and 3, so it's like really hard to join those together. And
Hmm.
then like when I listened to Paul, it's like, oh, ancient cosmology is that. And like all of that makes so much sense. And then Peugeot's interpretation, oh my goodness. And then also Peterson as well. Peterson did a lot of work for me in
Hmm.
that. And so is the way I resolve, because like, of course, what, because I had a friend who I talked with regularly throughout my deconstruction period. He's a pastor's kid from a Baptist church. So
Hmm.
he's really fundamental in his perspective. Um, and so the danger he would always present to me, and this is the danger that the far left Christians fall into, is that if you discount the historical accuracy of the text, then you discredit its truth value, its validity, its value to current day
Hmm.
society. And Peterson especially helped me get past that. Because it's like Genesis is more true than a historical textbook.
Hmm.
It's true on what way more levels. It's true throughout time, and it provides. It's the key is that it's speaking in terms of the phenomenology of human experience,
Hmm.
not this disembodied monarchical vision that's only a recent invention
Right.
from 400 years ago.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. Yeah. So have you had any other like interests surrounding like do you spend a lot of your time reading or watching YouTube or like like for me I do sports and then I read and do
Mhm.
school and stuff like that. So like how do you spend your time
Okay.
nowadays?
Yeah. So a lot of it is YouTube. I wish I did more reading. Like I can tell reading your stuff that you read quite a bit. And
Me?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
And I unfortunately am more predisposed to auditory learning.
Okay.
So YouTube really is really easy to fall into.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean it's intellectually stimulating enough that it's like, but um I wish I read more. To all
Uh-huh.
say that. And like part of my college plan is to like to get me to read more, and we can get to that later
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
But in terms of other stuff, so yeah, YouTube and
Great. All
okay,
right. So you're saying like you want to read more. That's one of the things you want to do in
yeah,
college.
okay, got it, yeah, and so yeah, college forced me to read more
Hmm.
that, And then so in terms of other things I do, I play piano as well.
Okay.
I've
That's
done that
nice. I've always wanted to
for
play piano. I
okay.
used to take piano lessons, but I couldn't play anything right now. So,
So how long did you take lessons?
like 3 years. It was when I was in elementary and middle school. So,
Why'd you stop?
I don't know. I guess I didn't have the desire to do it at the time, and my mom was done making me do it.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I feel like a lot of people who have done instruments when they were little and then quit say this, but I'm going to say it anyways. I wish I wouldn't have. Maybe someday in the future I'll be able to pick it back up again, but I don't have the time for that right now, unfortunately.
Yes. Well, I guess I got lucky with a more disagreeable mom
Yeah.
because
My
I
mom's
was in,
very high in agreeableness. My mom is.
yeah, my mom is incredibly high in disagreeable.
Yeah.
So she it took a lot out of her, but she got me to practice, and then after like 4 or 5 years,
Okay.
once you learn how to like really read music and learn stuff yourself,
Mm-hmm.
you can do it for your own pleasure. And
Mm-hmm.
so like once I was 12, I discovered Bach's cello suites,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
which is easier to play on piano, right? Because it's just
Right.
for cello. And like that got me hooked. Right. And
Okay.
that
Yeah.
taught me how to read music, and that taught me how to be musical. And like I got really lucky there because that like me to enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so I play worship for my church as a consequence of that, which is
That's nice.
it's a great thing to be involved with.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that takes up some time, and
Mm-hmm.
then I play soccer as well.
Okay.
Not competitively. I don't play club at all.
Okay.
So I play rec leagues
Mm-hmm.
during during off season, and then so I play for school.
Mm-hmm.
Because once I hit high school, my disability was just like, no, you cannot surpass that level of skill. But apparently my team likes having me around, so they put up with me. So and it's good workout as well. So,
That's nice. Yeah.
I don't work out during off season, which is terrible. I need to, but so yeah, and I've been meaning to write something on this, but there's something about being on the team
Yeah.
that is really special.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
and so yeah, that will start at the end of this month. So I'm excited for that. And then let's see. I always feel like homework is a hobby.
Do you like school?
No, it's just the amount of time I put into it is just
Yeah.
ridiculous. And then like, and then I enjoy a big enough percentage of the work to like
Right.
call it a hobby, I guess.
Uh-huh.
So I spend quite a lot of time on that. And then I used to play video games. Like I don't know what happened. I just haven't played them for 2 months.
Okay.
Probably because of just how busy school is and all of that.
Right.
But, I play Overwatch quite regularly. So
Okay.
I played that game 5 years now. Like so I've really stuck with that game and really enjoy it. So
Okay. So are you looking at like where are you looking to go to college?
okay. So Biola University is basically where I'm set on.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And the reason for Biola, well, it has to do with the reason. So Biola is the honors college.
Right. The Tory deal.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And so if you're familiar with that,
Yeah, I am.
having to read that many books. Like I want to do it anyway, and I want to have a classical education akin to that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the primary reason why I'm going there, and I have friends going there, so that would
Right.
be nice.
So does your reform school use that classical language too?
No, it does
Okay.
not. My
Okay.
uh, the CSC day schools have really evolved in an interesting way.
Okay.
Um, because they're sort of an alternative to disenfranchised parents who don't like the public schools,
Yeah.
right? So and they're too busy or too lazy to homeschool their kids.
Mm.
So um so there's a lot like I actually wrote like a newspaper article for an assignment on the demographics of our school. Like
Okay.
only half or was no, it's 60% of the families there don't go to a reformed church,
Hmm.
which is a huge change from
Yeah.
like 30 years ago. 30 years ago, it would have
It was
been
all, and they were all Dutch too 30 years ago. There
yeah,
would be no non-Dutch people at those schools.
yes. And so now, like the Dutch is like 60% of the kids, which
Hmm.
is still a decent percentage, but it's like nowhere near where it used to be. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's influenced a lot of uh the Bible curriculum. It's become more evangelical.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's ongoing conversations about retaining reformed thought, and
Mm-hmm.
it is there, right? So
Right.
I'm taking so the class is called World Issues, because they're investigating the issues of the world basically, and like that perspective is really reformed. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's all criterion, renewal of the
Right.
world, all of that, right?
Right.
And then like our our mission statement is of course reformed in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And like all of the seniors are required to give a presentation on how the school has prepared them to fulfill the mission statement, which
Mm.
is something like shaping kids to be transforming influences in the world for Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and not all of the education is geared towards that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it depends on what Bible teacher you have, but at least from a top down level, they are trying to force what you've learned to fit that
Hmm.
reformed mold. So
Okay. Well, that's interesting. So do you consider yourself reformed?
I no, I don't. I so I go to a non-denominational church by my house. So I live half an hour away from London. And I chose that church because my best friend from middle school goes there, and
Mm.
like just the community was working. So
Mm-hmm.
like I don't agree with the pastors there, but I don't
Mm.
care.
Okay.
Like
Yeah.
and they give good messages. Like it doesn't
Right.
matter that we disagree on some issues.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, but I do consider myself very influenced by Reformed
Mm-hmm.
perspectives
Yeah.
via Paul Daniel Clay, via Dr. Leibel, the Bible history teacher, uh, and so I definitely have a lot of Reformed in me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Um, I don't know. Is there anything else you want to say about your life before I kind of talk about mine? My story's not nearly as interesting as yours, but we could find some points of connection perhaps and then go from there.
I didn't know my story was interesting. Okay. Let's see. Okay, one more trend that I've been like
Okay. Yeah.
trying to figure out how to fit into my story. Because it is another like hot topic issue in Christianity that I've wrestled with throughout. So in 6th grade, I developed homosexual attractions.
Mm,
And then they never went away.
okay.
And they're the only sexual attractions I have.
Mm,
And so I spent like how long? 2.5 years looking at this was pre my deconstruction.
okay.
So during like 8th grade freshman year, I was figuring all of that stuff out and then came down on a traditional perspective
Mm-hmm.
of absence. Um but so of course I disagree with a lot of the people on the left in the church. So that's
Mm-hmm.
one side of my interest. But also I found that like being in a Christian school, a lot of people still don't get the nuances of that debate.
Hmm.
Like the basic distinction between the person having homosexual attractions and acting on them is
Mm,
lost on people.
mm-hmm.
Like they don't get that.
Right.
And so like the way that pans out is if you mention homosexuality at all in a positive light, or not in a positive light, just in like a compassionate light, right?
Mm-hmm.
10% of the students tell their parents, and the parents get mad
Hmm.
at the school. There was the board wanted someone to speak at chapel on that issue, and so they did, and then they got a bunch of complaints about how they were promoting same-sex marriage, even though they weren't.
Hmm.
So, and then like a little personal anecdote on that, which is really interesting to track the development of that issue in Christian circles, is that I developed a I developed a crush on someone freshman year, and
Mm-hmm.
he's a real popular guy, so I thought it it wouldn't matter, right? But then I became friends with him, right? So it's really awkward
Mm-hmm.
to have that. And so I started contemplating telling him so that like, it would just clear the air. And I talked to my parents about it, and they're like, no, 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 no. If you tell him, he will tell the whole community and you will be outcast. Right.
Mm.
But I knew this guy was pretty agreeable and we got along real well, and that most likely that wasn't going to happen. So I told him,
Mm.
and he was fine, right? Which that wouldn't have happened 20 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
even though he was of the predisposition to be accepting. I don't think that would have happened 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so that shows the influence of the gay rights movement, for example, on Christians to
Mm-hmm.
take uh, a less aggressive position on that.
Right.
And so yeah, that issue is just another thing. Well, and then one last thing on that, so at the beginning of this year, I started talking with several of my teachers about preaching a chapel on that,
Mm.
because I'm in such a unique position
Mm-hmm.
to to speak to it. And then all of them were like, no, you should not do that because
Mm.
we're not in a place where you will be socially acceptable if you do that. So it's just interesting to track the movement of the church via my school on that. So
Yeah. So have you found, like, did you watch Paul's stuff about marriage this fall?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
What'd you think about that?
I pretty much agree with everything that Paul says.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, I like his analysis how of how the left is treating this issue is spot on, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I find it really insightful. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you become even a more interesting person, Richard.
All right.
All right. Well, anyways, so I I'm 18 years old. I turned 18 yesterday. I'm also a
Okay.
senior in high school. I live in Idaho in a very rural community. The closest Walmart is 2.5 hours away.
Wow.
The closest other town is an hour away, but it doesn't have anything in it. It's like less than 1,000 people. The town that I live in is 3,000 people. We've lived here for the past several years. Before that, my family lived in Oregon. My my mom and dad are both from Oregon. They were high school sweethearts. They got married when they were both still in college. And so I was born in lower Western Oregon in Roseburg, and my family kind of moved around a little bit in different places in Oregon. But then by the time I was in kindergarten, we had moved back to the same town that my parents were both from. And we lived there for a while. My dad is in agriculture. He's a rancher and a farmer. And so we moved back there because that's what he wanted to do. And turns, we knew this all along. And my dad thought that his grandpa was going to be able to give him some land around that area when he died, but that didn't end up happening. So then my dad was trying to make it work by himself. He bought a small piece of land for ranching, only 160 acres, and worked in town. He was a banker, and then he was also a loan officer. He he was one and then the other and then the other again. And so that was really hard because that's what my dad wanted to do. My mom went to university to be a school teacher, to do PE and health and athletic things like that. She was a college athlete and very into those sorts of things. And so, but then she had me, and then she had my sister 2 years later, and then she had my brother when my brother's 5 years younger than me. Sorry, 4 years. Seems like 5 sometimes. 4 years younger than me. And then more and more kids. My parents have 8 kids now. They're done having kids, by the way, for anyone who would like to know. But yeah, so she never went to go and teach school, and still hasn't. But when I was in kindergarten, I was sent to the public school, the same school that my mom went K through 12 in. And that, I mean, if I would have graduated from that school, I can't even remember how many generations of my family it would have been, like 6, probably, maybe 7. So very embedded in that community. But I went there kindergarten year. It didn't really go all that well. And then I went first grade again, and it really did not go that well. And so my parents were thinking of, other alternatives. Maybe I go to private school in the bigger town that was like 30-40 minutes away. Maybe you do this crazy thing called homeschool, because we had some friends that were doing that. And so then my mom decided to start to homeschool me and my sister. My sister had been in kindergarten. I was in second grade, and I've been homeschooled ever since. So the first 2 years that we did homeschool was pretty rough, to say the least. I should have asked you this. Maybe you could tell me now, but I always like to know what people's big 5 traits are, because I've been historically really interested in personality, and I found that the big 5 is definitely my favorite of the test. But I'm very high in neuroticism. I'm over the 95th percentile, which is interesting for being male as well. I'm very high in openness. I'm very high in conscientiousness. I'm quite low in agreeableness, and about 30-40% in extroversion. So that means that I do things, but even as a little kid, I wouldn't always want to do what my mom wanted me to do. And so that didn't work out too well. And then my mom's pretty agreeable. So those first 2 years were really rough. I would always have conflicts with my mom about doing my math because my brain is not geared mathematically, unfortunately. I wish it was, but I'm way better at language than I am mathematics. But anyways, and then fourth grade year, actually third grade year, my mom figured out heard about this classical education model for homeschooling, and actually a support group that's international. I don't know if you've heard about it or not. It's called Classical Conversations. They have hundreds of thousands of students kind of enrolled in this program. You meet once a week, and it's all the way from little kids all the way up into the end of high school. And we had some friends who were doing that, and my mom thought, well, what I'm doing right now isn't working, so might as well try that. And it's based off of a lot of memorization, like the trivium, and they kind of take Dorothy Sayers' essay, Lost Tools of Learning, which helped to launch classical education again, especially in, I don't know, non-religious circles. And then that was adopted by this guy named Doug Wilson, and so it was popularized in that way. But basically, the trivium would be the grammar, dialectic, and rhetoric. And Dorothy Sayers proposed that grammar was like elementary school kids. Dialectic was like late elementary, middle school, and early high school kids, and rhetoric was later high school and college students. And so what that means is that when you're a little kid, you memorize a lot of things, and I'm really good at memorization. And so that started to work out really well for me, and started to work out a lot better for my mom. And so we've been doing that ever since. I'm in, like I said, I'm my senior year. I've still homeschooled, and it's been pretty good, I would say, by and large. So anyways, come my fifth grade year, my dad is having a hard time, obviously, because he doesn't really have a place that can make enough money to support anything, and he has to work in town. He doesn't like to work in town. So my dad's uncle is actually has connections into the higher echelons, I suppose you could say, of the ranching world. And there's this program in South Texas that's a master's degree program for ranch management. It's the only ranch management master's degree program in the world, but they only accept 3 candidates a year. And they have, I don't know, probably 40 or 50 applicants from what I've heard every year. So it's pretty selective, but my dad thought, might as well try it. Sounds good. And so then he got accepted into that program. We lived in Oregon. And so then my summer between my 5th and 6th grade year, we moved to South Texas. It's 100 miles away from the second checkpoint on the Mexican border, because you have the south border down there, and then they have another checkpoint, like it's like a whole nother border to try and catch more drugs. And so we were down there. It's incredibly humid, incredibly hot. They have 2 seasons, hot and hotter. There's nothing in between. It's flat for as long as you can see. It's the bottom of the Great Plains. But that was a 2-year program. So my dad, and because this program that we're in, Classical Conversations, is international, there are community groups other places. My mom actually helped start one in the town that we were in, because we were having to drive 2 hours the first year that we were there to get to a group. But so yeah, we were there for 2 years, my 5th and 6th grade years. And then actually, no, I'm wrong. My bad. It was my 6th and 7th grade years that we were in Texas. I was wrong about that. My bad. So anyways, 6th and 7th grade years. And then my dad was getting job offers to different places, but kind of wanted, it seemed, a place that was more traditional, where he wasn't just a office guy, but he was able to do office stuff and also work on the ranch. And it was a working cattle ranch, and he wasn't just an executive. And so this job that my dad still is doing as a ranch manager here on this ranch in Idaho was sent to the program, and my dad applied. They did the job interview and everything went great. And so my dad accepted the job. And so right after my end of my 7th grade year, basically, we moved in late April, early May here. So we've lived here since then. And now we don't have a classical conversations group in the town that I'm in. So we actually drive 2 hours over, and it's on a pass over the Rocky Mountains. It's actually the same pass that Lewis and Clark took when they went from the East Coast to the West Coast. We drive over that every single week to go to a classical conversations community that's in Montana, that's north of us. So yeah, so 8th grade year, I had always liked basketball. I really got more into basketball when we were in Texas because I didn't have anything else to do, really. We had a concrete driveway that was pretty nice and a basketball hoop. And so I practiced basketball all the time. So I got even more into it then. And then 8th grade year, I got into it even more and was practicing like all the time, like ignoring school to try to do it. I could still get done with my school, but I was not focused on school. I would, it'd be like, oh, I need to practice. And this was in off season, an hour and a half, 2 hours a day, playing basketball, coming up into my 8th grade year. And one of the things that you can do in Idaho is anybody can use the services of the public school, sports, classes, anything. So I'm able to play for the team. And so I was able to play for the team my 8th grade year, and I was pretty good at basketball. I'm not like trying to brag or anything. I always try to tell people that, but I am pretty decent basketball player still. But I was probably better for my age in 8th grade than I am now because I just put so much work into it, and now I don't quite as much. But anyways, and so even after my 8th grade year, the summer between my 8th grade and freshman year, I went with the varsity team, who are all juniors and seniors, to summer tournaments and stuff. And that was really not, because I was having a pretty good life, let's say, up until that point. But when that started to happen, all these things that kids do at a public school in high school, and you're in 8th grade and you're 14 years old and you don't know anything, especially someone who's homeschooled and around these people. And so that was really hard on me. And some circumstances and other things really led to kind of a deconstruction on my part. It was weird because I was listening to on YouTube like motivational people, telling you could do everything you wanted. None of them were Christian. And then I would go and read the Bible. And I basically, before I had even heard of people who are prosperity gospel teachers, I had basically come up and was using the same passages that I later knew was prosperity gospel. It's not like, that's one of the things I try to tell people, like Plato's ideas of the forms is not really a complicated idea. I don't know if it's even Plato's idea. It's just an idea that's out there, like prosperity gospel. It's not really, I don't know, Creflo Dollar's idea. It's just kind of an idea that's out there. So I came upon that, and that was hard. And then I started like questioning all these other things and was kind of deconstructing, not really like renouncing the faith at all. So that's one thing I forgot to mention. My parents are very religious. We could say it that way. We're Protestant, more or less non-denominational, have gone to Baptist churches more than any other denomination. And so, yeah, now we don't go to a Baptist church. But so anyways, so I was starting to have a deconstruction period with that and had a really hard time of it going into my freshman year, to the point where, so like I was saying, I was having these hard times with these things, and then it kind of moved beyond the because prosperity gospel deconstruction thing to starting to deconstruct other things. And then I started to really have a hard time with my parents, because my parents are, I would say, pretty strict, and I'm not saying that in a bad way. They just want the best for their kids. And so like I was starting to be alienated from the family and not like want to be around people and stuff like that, getting very involved in, with peers and just people on the basketball team in public school. Not that public school is bad by any means or anything, but it was a symbol of me kind of falling apart at that time. And so then I was really, really not doing well, and really had some, terrible experiences and terrible things happen during that fall of my freshman year that really brought me to the end of that. And so then I had to kind of put my life back together after that, especially heading into second semester, I remember, of freshman year. And so I started to do that. And one of the things that was tied up with putting myself back together was focusing more on school and being more academic. Because before, like, I would just read books and I would read them fast, but I wasn't that interested in reading that many books. Or I could do my school and I could do it quite well, but I wasn't really interested in what was behind the school. And I was more interested in basketball and social things. But then I started to, be more interested in that, started to be more interested in even intellectual questions surrounding Christianity, starting to get into some of these things, starting to hear about for the first time, and maybe not hear about, but care about for the first time, things like Calvinism and what's up with this, divine election stuff in Calvinism and predestination, and what's up with the Arminians, and what's even, because before I had thought, well, obviously creationism is the only way to go. That's what I had been taught. And, like, I guess you could say Ken Ham's arguments are not all that sophisticated, but if you only listen to Ken Ham, they sound pretty great. So just starting to think more and more about those things, and starting to be surrounded by people like that. And because I was so young, and because I'm so high in openness, I was bringing all these things in like at once. And that wasn't exactly a good thing, because then I would start to be arrogant about what I knew, which actually wasn't what I knew. It was what I thought I knew, and not really understanding other people's opinions and sides of things, and just was not a very nice person, let's say, during that time. So I was getting into books and ideas and things, and getting really interested in actually paying attention to what I was doing in school, and not just doing school just to do it, and actually trying. And that continued all the way through into the summer. And I worked during the summer, especially starting that summer. I was like, now I work a lot during the summer for my dad on the ranch. But so I would be, I'd have time to listen to things with an ear pod or whatever while I was moving irrigation water or whatever it was. And so I can't remember exactly why, but, well, actually, before I found Jordan Peterson, I started to get really, really, really interested in like Ben Shapiro, and started to listen to a lot of Ben Shapiro and
Same with me.
yeah. And these conservative, like, just, I don't know, I shouldn't call them crazy, not because I don't exactly disagree with them, but I feel like that partly played into some of my arrogance as well, because I just, Ben Shapiro knows everything. Everybody knows that Ben Shapiro knows everything. And so then, because I was so impressionable, all of a sudden I knew everything as well. And not only everything about politics, but everything about everything else in life. And so that was not good, I would say. But that entire summer I was listening to Ben Shapiro, and then other people in those types of circles, including Charlie Kirk. I don't know if you've heard of him, but yeah. So anyways, and there was one podcast episode where Charlie Kirk had on Jordan Peterson. And I can't remember why I decided to listen to it. Maybe I was listening to every single one already. And so I decided to listen to it, and I was like, man, this guy's really interesting. And he talks in a lot less of an arrogant way than a lot of these other people, and isn't so sure that, I don't know, right-wing politics should be your religion. Let's just say it that way. And so that was really interesting to me, but I never really started to really listen to him until later that summer and early into the fall, because I don't even know why exactly, but he just, the YouTube algorithms, Jordan Peterson was pretty popular. You had all these clip channels. And so I just started watching clips from the clip channels, 10-minute clips, 20-minute clips. And then I started to listen to Jordan Peterson's podcast, and I listened to the biblical series, and I listened to, because he publishes 12, or at least did, the 12 Rules for Life talks on there. And so I don't know, I was listening to a lot of Jordan Peterson. And so that started to continue on and keep going. And then I was starting to have a rough time again with friends and different things like that during that time. This was now going into my sophomore year. The year before, I had played some varsity basketball. I was mostly on JV, partly because of my choice, and part of that was because I really did not like who the varsity coach was, and I had sworn to myself that I was not going to play if the varsity coach was the same person. And so that year I decided not to play basketball either. And
Wow. Okay.
so a lot of my friends are from the basketball team. I have some friends that are from the homeschool group as well, but there just aren't as many people in the homeschool group, and you only see them once a week, not every single day, with basketball practice and games and whatnot. And so I decided not to play basketball, and was having trouble with friends, having trouble with social things, having a lot of anxiety, I probably could have gone to a psychologist and got diagnosed as clinically depressed. It was pretty bad, and just really not having a great time, still really interested in all these intellectual things. But because, my neuroticism, like I said, it is high already, but I tend to be a pretty confident person. And so I don't always struggle with, I don't feel like I struggle with it all that much. Like, it's kind of surprising to people when they know that, when they understand what neuroticism is, and then I consistently test for it being really high. But that just started to kick in, and it was really not good. And so I started to listen to even more Jordan Peterson things, because I didn't have really a lot else to do, and still reading books and things. But I would, when I was feeling depressed, I would try to listen to something Jordan Peterson would say. And that's why I've said before in the past, I think maybe it was only in one of my other conversations, and maybe I wrote about it somewhere, but I consider myself definitely doing this online with YouTube and the blog thing because of Jordan Peterson. And partly, almost it's kind of drastic to say this, but almost alive in the same way. I am shaped by Jordan Peterson more than any other person that's alive today that I have never personally met. Then it's not even particularly close. But and it's also interesting to me, in this Discord community behind Paul Vanderklay, a lot of people find Jordan Peterson and then they kind of move on. But I've watched thousands and thousands of hours of Jordan Peterson, and watched lots of lectures more than once, watched lots of, listened to a lot of things. So I'm heavily influenced, I would say, by him. And so then, going into the end of that year, I was starting to do better. And then going into the summer, it was getting better as well. And I actually had a pretty good summer by and large that year, and a pretty good fall. But then I was doing basketball again, but then stuff started to not go too well a second time. And I wasn't as into Jordan Peterson that time. So what's interesting to me about my life, I guess, is that I've always, there were some points where I maybe didn't, but believed in Christianity nominally, but never really understood what it's like. And maybe this is just really evangelical and Protestant, but to have a relationship with God, what does that even mean? Because there's yes, I believe it, but then there's the falling in love part with God as well. And so and this was last year, during the winter months last year, in late fall months, I was having a really hard time. And I feel like that really broke me down and made me, in a lot of ways, dependent on God in a way that I'd never been before. Because even before, like, as great as Jordan Peterson is, he's not God, you know. And so, like, Jordan Peterson can tell you all these great things and like try to help you in your life, but Jordan Peterson has his own problems, as all of us well know. And so it wasn't, you know, since then, since this last spring, I mean, I feel like I've slowly gotten to a place. I mean, like, you can go watch, anybody can go watch my videos that I put out this time last year. They were still, not that I'm not this way now, but very like arrogant and self-focused and know-it-all still. But I don't know. It's just been like, I feel like I mean, you've had a lot harder life than I have, I would say, but I'm not always super emotionally stable. And I feel like that's partly what God wants me to be like, so that I depend on him, because I'm the type of person who is able to do a lot of things and be busy and engage in a lot of things, partly because I'm so conscientious, but then it doesn't actually, it's not sustaining, you know, and I actually need God to be sustaining there for me. At least that's so far as I can tell. So anyways, since this last spring, my life has slowly gotten more stable. And it was last March when I first found out about Paul Vanderklay. And I found out about him because I was doing this YouTube thing, and there was another YouTuber. He has kind of a small channel, like 2,000 subs probably at this point, but it's actually, he has really good content because he, if you like philosophy, academic philosophy, I don't know if anybody watching does, but he interviews high level academics who are in the philosophy departments. And he actually asked Paul Vanderklay to be on his channel one time. So I watched that conversation. It was like, man, this is one of the best conversations I have ever watched. But then I was like, and then I went over to Paul Vanderklay's channel and I was like, wait, this guy publishes every single day, like 1 or 2 hours. And I didn't know that he had the podcast at that time. And I actually don't watch that much YouTube. I mostly just listen to podcasts because I don't know, like, listening and watching isn't that much different for me. Maybe because I've never really done the watching thing, but I was just like, I can't do this. Like, I can't, like, what does he think? You know, I can't do this much content. This is a crazy man. So I just kind of never really listened to anything ever that for months that he was putting out. I was listening to other people. You know, I've always listened to Jordan Peterson, less during that time, less now. I feel kind of embarrassed. Not embarrassed, but it's kind of weird because I have only listened to probably 10 of the Jordan Peterson conversations that he's put out on his podcast since he came back, you know, and I don't know, Jordan's just different now. But anyways, I should probably try to listen to more of them. But anyways, there's so much content. Anyways, that's when I first found Paul Vanderklay. And you know, I was just going about by my business and trying to figure out exactly what I was doing, because this stuff online became kind of a big deal to me at the end of basketball season last year, so in the spring. And it was kind of like, I wasn't like, I feel bad too now saying this because I haven't published anything on YouTube in like 3 weeks. My life has been really busy recently, and I haven't wrote that much things either, but I was really kind of not doing well with the YouTube thing. And so I was just trying to kind of figure out what I was supposed to be doing with the YouTube thing. And I was still struggling with the arrogance, I would say. Not that I don't now, but just wanting to have it all together and everything put together and make it like be very official. And it was in mid-July of 2021 when I figured out that Paul had a podcast feed, and I listened to, I think the first, I don't know how much of his stuff you watch or how much you remember, but he had a conversation with, I think her name was Sarah, in the Netherlands about, knowing more than the pastor does in church and what you're supposed to do about that. That was like the first conversation I had ever listened to by him. And I was like, wow, this is really good. And then I just started listening to every single thing. and then he went on vacation. And so then I started, I had everything listened to because he's on Podbean, so you can only do last 100 episodes. So I like listened back, backwards to get everything in, and that was really helpful. Paul's been really helpful because he's kind of the opposite of me in terms of neuroticism, like he says all the time. So he doesn't worry about things, and so that really helped me to see what it's like to not worry about things, because I was still kind of struggling with anxiety and stuff. But I don't know, he wasn't like talking about anxiety and things like that, and he really strengthened my faith, I would say, in a lot of ways. Not that I didn't have a strong faith at that time. This is only several months ago, so like, something could change really, really quickly. But I just was really fascinated by the way that he would engage people and their ideas. And I mean, probably like anyone who listens to Paul a lot is. And so I listened to all of his stuff in all of September and all of October and all of November of this last year, and then part of December. But I've kind of fallen off the wagon, unfortunately, recently, just because there's so much, and I just have a lot of things going on in my life. I wish that I was able to, but I'm not. So that's kind of, I guess, my story in a nutshell. And I am definitely Christian, but part of what, because Jordan Peterson is definitely the most influential person alive that I've never met, but Paul's probably up there like second, and part of what he, like I was saying, part of what he helped me to realize, and really in such a short period of time, is just how to care about and for people. And one of the interesting things, I guess I would say about me is I've always, like, since I was a little kid, I've said that I wanted to be a pastor, and that's kind of gone away and then come back. But one of the things that I've watched happen to me since listening to Paul is that I've really felt that come back in a different way this time around. Because I think he embodies that really, really well, especially with stuff online. And so that's really helped me with putting, like having a model for putting things out online too, and being able to just engage with people. So that's kind of my story, I guess. I'm looking into colleges right now. I've applied to 4. They're all except for one. One is George Fox in Newberg, Oregon, so northeastern Oregon. But all the rest of them are small Christian classical schools, kind of doing the classical thing that I've done thus far. New St. Andrews College in Moscow, Idaho. John Witherspoon College in Rapid City, South Dakota. That one doesn't have, if you're in the classical world, you might not recognize John Witherspoon, but you'll probably recognize New St. Andrews. And then actually a Catholic one in Lander, Wyoming, called Wyoming Catholic College. So those are my things right now. And just kind of working through life, I guess. Like we all are. But,
okay, so let me continue that classical education thing that I want to go back to. So going to those colleges, was that just would that go into that rhetoric part of the trio? Or
go ahead. Were you gonna say?
Like, how does that like relate back to what you've been doing?
Okay, so it's interesting because Dorothy Sayers, she was like a colleague of C.S. Lewis. Have you heard of her before?
I have.
Okay, have you read her essay, The Lost Jewels of Learning?
I have not.
Okay, it's a pretty good read. It's not that long. But what she proposes is that, like I was saying, grammar stage, dialectic stage, and rhetoric stage by the ages, roughly speaking. And I can see why she's saying that. But at the same time, I kind of think, well, we're always doing all of them constantly, because we're always constantly learning new things. We're always constantly taking that new material and bouncing it off of our experiences that we're having now, our past experiences, other people's past experiences, our interactions that we're having with people right now. And we're always constantly doing the rhetoric thing, which is arguing for a certain perspective. And what's real interesting about like something that is happening around Paul Vanderklay is that people are doing that and they don't know that that's what they're doing. And this has actually been I would say it's actually been articulated beforehand. And this is what people are calling classical education. But basically what Paul Vanderklay is fostering in some ways is classical education for adults, you know, because people are constantly taking in this new information. They're constantly freely bouncing it off of other people. And at the same time doing the rhetoric thing where they're constructing their own view and giving that to other people. And it's this constant cycle that I would say is really beautiful. So to, I guess, answer your question about, is it the rhetoric? I don't know. Again, maybe I kind of disagree with what Sayers is saying, because you don't like, you kind of come up with your opinions when you're younger, but you keep coming up with more and more opinions and changing them. So yeah, that's I guess what my thoughts would be on that.
Yeah, because when I went into the college search, like I was really looking for something resembling the community around Paul Vanderklay.
Yeah.
And also beside that, with like building that on top of the Western canon and tradition, but something that is dialectical and is like following dialogos, as John Vervaeke has laid out, right? So, but like, I think because I didn't have the background in the homeschool classical education space, I just looked at the standard college like landscape and was just looking for it within there. So like I didn't recognize any of the three you mentioned, but like and like I'd be curious if you looked into Biola, what your thoughts are on it, because like that was why I chose it so much, was because it seemed like the best and only option I could find that fostered that kind of environment.
Right. So at least I don't know that much about Biola, but Biola is a bigger school. So like some of these schools that I'm looking at are 200 or less students. George Fox is like 1,300. So it's like a more normal sized private school, but these other schools are really small. So on the community aspect, it's like you're in a community, and you know, that's how it is. Now, if you're going to the honors college, that's going to be different than going to the regular college. From what I understand, because I have looked at that Biola and the honors college there before, if I remember right, you basically do your general eds with the honors college instead of regular, right? But you're still going to have a specific major. Now, that's interesting because that is different than these colleges that I'm looking at, where you have a general major. You get a major in liberal arts, basically. You get a Bachelor of Liberal Arts degree. So like say at New St. Andrews, you are required to take, and they're Reformed, which is interesting. So, and they're not Dutch Reformed. They're like, they were the Young, Restless, and Reformed before the Young, Restless, and Reformed came about. But anyways, so at New St. Andrews, you are required to take theology your freshman year, history and Latin, and music. And so they have emphasis on, and then second year I think you have to take Latin again, but maybe it's just any foreign language, theology, and maybe something else, but you get electives. So you can kind of diversify a little bit, but it's very humanities centric. And like at Wyoming Catholic College, you have the same type of thing. Like everybody takes, at Wyoming Catholic, it's even more so because everybody takes the exact same courses. So you don't get any diversification. So that's different because that's more of, I don't know, it's hard to say, but I would almost say pre-modernity, because what happened in modernity is we kind of split things up and we specialized. Now, part of what is really helpful about specialization is you can specialize. And what that means is you can get really, really good at one thing. The problem is that you're only really, really good at one thing and you're not diversified. So what's hard about like these colleges that I'm looking at is, well, what do you do after? You either have to start business or go to graduate school or go into ministry or, teach at a elementary school or something like that. You can't go from New St. Andrews and go to go and be architect or something, or go and be an engineer. You can't start your own engineering form. So that's part of what's going on there. But I don't know. Yeah. So from what I know, it depends on what you mean by classical too, because if you're, I don't know, it can kind of be thrown around as a term.
Yeah, I think I am throwing it around as a term. I don't have a good definition for it. It's just sort of a vague categorization thing, right? But you raise an interesting point by connecting it to identity and saying that, like, really the model of like majoring in something is a very modern thing to do, right?
Yeah.
So because I looked at St. John College, which has the same thing, like it has like one major. And when I saw that, I'm like, what the heck is this? Like, what am I going to do with it?
Yeah.
My mom like really like, so I'm set on getting a philosophy degree, but that's on the condition with my mother of getting a second degree that's more career oriented. Right?
Okay.
So like, even if I liked St. John, my mom probably would not be on board with that.
Yeah.
But like, it's interesting to think, what is Biola, well, what is Torrey, the honors college, sacrificing by being nested within that model? Right?
Yeah.
Because like the university as an institution is not fulfilling its original function as a consequence of that specialization, I don't think, which is probably bad. But
yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting because the people who started the universities in Europe in the 1200s would never have thought that you could have done the specialization thing. And it's almost more, and it's really interesting too, because you have general education courses, which is basically just the corpse of the old stuff from before modernity. It's basically just the corpse of, oh yeah, you need to know about all these other things instead of just launching you straight into your major. And so that's why you have utilitarian Americans nowadays who are saying, well, why don't we be like these schools in Canada or like these schools in Europe or these other places where you just only take courses for your major? It's like, well, because we still have these dead things laying around, but it's not a university anymore. If you're only focusing on one thing, it's no longer a university. It's a training school is what it is. Because the university, they named them universities because it encompassed everything. It was where, you could learn about everything and everything could come together, universal university, it's in the name. So yeah, that's a really good point.
Okay. Got it. Okay. So that's interesting to know. And like, that's why business is like the number one major. That's the most, or it's seen as the most utilitarian degree. Right? And so like, yeah, it's really interesting to track that. But anyway, I want to back up to talk about homeschooling.
Okay.
Because so I have a friend who he just joined my high school in my junior year, so last year, and he had done homeschooling all before that, and he had a really rough time. Mostly because his by my estimation, because his parents weren't as involved as to make it successful. But he seems to think that it was mostly because they were teaching him things that weren't useful. Sort of exactly this argument of the utilitarian stream. And so all of these things that I'm learning in homeschool are just irrelevant to what I want to do. Like he's going to do a business major, of course. And so I'm curious, like, do you think homeschooling only works for a certain kind of student, or can it be more universalized to different kinds of people?
Yeah, that's interesting, because what you can actually do with homeschooling is you can make it very specific. And so maybe his experience was that it was, he was learning things that were unuseful. But what you can do in homeschooling is you can actually, make it very, like I said, very specific. So you can take more courses and classes that are just on something that you're interested in and ignore other things, especially if you're doing a non-accredited homeschool program, because then you're basically, it's up to you, and depends on what state you live in, because some states require you to do certain things. But you can, it can go both ways, which is, it's less so now, but there are still people who do unschooling, where they say that they're homeschooling, but their kids don't really do school. That's not a good route. But instead of unschooling, somebody could just do, specialization in biology or something, and, hardly take any courses that didn't apply to that. So that's what I would think. Like with the type of homeschool that I'm doing this last year. So our community is really small. And they want the communities to be small, especially like in high school, the classes. So it's like capped at like 12. You can't have more than 12 in a class. And I think in a couple of years, they might even limit it to 7 or 8, but because they want you to be in a community and in conversation with one another. Like in high school, you start to, like for some subjects, the whole community time is just taken up discussing things and having conversations. But anyways, 2 of the students that were with us last year for junior year quit and didn't do senior year, because they didn't feel that what the program was affording was what was most useful to them long term. So they are both doing college courses, and the one is doing more college courses than the other one's working more. But so that's kind of how that goes. So it just depends. Like I said, homeschool is it can be very diverse. Yeah,
that makes more sense. If you do it right, it's probably the best route. Now, obviously, you have the social aspect. I think you got that from sports. Sounds like.
Yeah, the social thing is really interesting, because it's not always that kids need, like, they really want to be social. It's that they don't always know what normal is if you're homeschooled. And even if you're around other kids, if they're also homeschooled, I'm not saying that like normal is good or anything, but you don't always know what normal is. And you're not really in the culture that's been passed down of high schoolers, and you're not, like, what I see with a lot of homeschoolers is they never really are able to break away from their parents sufficiently well in high school. Not that you should break away from your parents all the way in high school by any means, but you just don't have that same pure connection. Not that you should like give in to peer pressure. I'm not saying any of that, but it's just, it's really strange. And then the other thing with homeschool, especially for like my mom, because she can't babysit me, is I have to have a lot of self-motivation to do things. And that's kind of like college. So like when I try to explain to people what my homeschooling is like, it's almost like college, where, you go to class one day a week. In college, it'd be more days a week, but you have to study by yourself,
Yeah.
and some kids just aren't equipped to do that. But yeah, it just depends on your parent, depends on the program that you're using. One of the things in homeschool is that you don't get, your parent may be able to teach you and help you with everything, but they may not be super great at everything either.
Yes.
So
Yes. Yeah. Like, when I think about myself, it's funny that like, I'm the opposite of you in conscientiousness. So
okay.
I'm in the 19th percentile.
Okay. Yeah, I'm like 98, 99.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of insane.
Yeah. So it kind of sucks to be low in conscientiousness. I
It
don't
kind of sucks to be high because you feel guilty if you're not doing something.
Yeah, it is nice to be able to relax. So
Yeah, you feel really guilty if you try to relax if you're high in conscientiousness. But anyways, you were saying.
Yeah, and then like the problem with me is that until I'm not that high in openness, I'm like the 56th
Okay.
percentile.
Okay.
But nonetheless, my interests are so divergent. Like, like, are we thinking within a given week about like 5 different intellectual strands?
Mm-hmm.
And like, I haven't put in the work to create a structure to make that thinking useful, right? So like, I think about one for like a day and then I forget it for 3 days. And eventually it just fades away. Like I don't write them down, I don't take notes. Like, and when I stumbled upon your Substack, I'm like, this guy is producing things, right? He's writing things.
Uh-huh.
And I don't do that. I just think. And
Uh,
then they go away.
yeah.
Because I'm not predisposed to like actually create something out
Yeah.
of those ideas. Which is like, and then going into college, I just wonder how I'll do, because in high school, I really like, I can't manage a lot of things, like, but I want to. And so like just narrowing in on something is going to be very difficult.
Yeah. Do you know how high you are in neuroticism?
I am 33 percentile.
So pretty low. I was talking to my good friend about this a couple weeks ago because she's low in neuroticism but high in openness. Not quite as high in openness as I am, but still pretty high. And she'll do the same thing. We'll kind of jump around with different things. And I was thinking about it, and I think that part of the reason why, because I've always taken notes on things and written things down. It's only in the last year that I've been publishing it publicly. And actually, my motivation originally for doing that was, well, I'm doing this by myself. Why not put it out there and see if anybody pays attention to it, type of a thing. But is because I am so high in neuroticism, I just pay a lot of attention to detail. And even though I'm high in openness, I don't jump around a lot because it's hard on me. It's hard on, I don't even know what to say exactly, but like my emotions almost, because there's just like, because if you're high in neuroticism, you're kind of scared of new circumstances. But I'm pulled in both ways because I really like new things, but then I'm really cautious with them. So and because I'm high in conscientiousness, so really orderly, I can organize things really well. It's not always nice to be high in neuroticism, but that is a benefit, unexpected benefit that I think that has helped me in terms of doing this, because it's not like something I have to work on. It's just kind of the way I am to, do that, like you're saying with the Substack. Yeah. Just to try to keep track of things. Yeah. But yeah, that's interesting. Because
also, like, when I'm given a task, then I'll do it, which is really interesting. Like, so I remember freshman year, like, we were taking like a Washington State history class, and like one of the projects was we were given a list of things, is like of 20 like different significant historical topics in Washington. And like, the page limit was like 2. And so most people like barely talked about each one or something like that. But then I wrote 15 pages.
It's a
Right.
lot, especially for a
Yeah.
freshman. Yeah.
And it was a waste of my time. But I still did it because once I was in it, I'm like, I have to do this well. And I have to cover everything in detail and have like 2 citations for it. Like I had like 23 citations for that paper. It was stupid. But and
It's
then
a lot.
like yeah, like I recently did a similar thing, like an 11-page paper with a 2, when it was only a 2-page limit. But like directing that tendency towards something, well, directing it on my own volition is one thing, like without having to be forced to do it, and then knowing where to direct that, right, is just going into college, something I'll be thinking about
Yeah.
a lot. So.
Yeah. It's interesting though that you would do that much extra work.
Yeah, I'm very long-winded. I reading some of my medical examinations. It was like a speech, and the therapist notes were I tried to encourage Richard to use smaller words and to talk in shorter sentences, but he refused to and wanted to fully express himself.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting. I've been accused of being long-winded before as well, so I can relate.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see. I want to go back. Okay, so I'm interested in the political interest before the interest in Jordan Peterson. Because so when COVID hit in March, and then when the George Floyd protests started, like I was listening to Ben Shapiro quite a bit before that, but like after the Floyd protest, like that's why I really got into the politics thing. And then that sort of led into a deeper exploration of the more fundamental ideas via Paul Vanderklay and a deeper dive into Peterson. So I'm curious if you do you see a connection between the two? Because I didn't in my case. I sort of saw them as parallel. But it's interesting that those two things are correlated in both of our stories.
Yeah, but didn't you find Paul Vanderklay before Shapiro?
Did.
Okay.
Yeah. So but I didn't get into him as deeply until after.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Like, part of what I was getting from Ben Shapiro was a lot of very opinionated opinions. And so not a whole lot of understanding of the other side. And so for me, like when I started to listen to Jordan Peterson, and because he's a personality psychologist and talking about personality and politics, that was really interesting. And especially when I started listening to Paul a couple months ago and understanding, because I never understood, even listening to Jordan, what the liberal side of things, like how you could arrive at a liberal viewpoint, let's say left-wing politics. But through listening to Paul Vanderklay, I was starting to see it, especially with some things like even like the gay things, and even with COVID and different things like that, that it's really more because I knew this before, but I didn't understand it. I guess maybe you know Vervaeke better than I do. Maybe you could plug that into one of his 4Ps, but just knowing that it is really a religion, and that's kind of what is being practiced, it seems, in left-wing politics, and then realizing that it's the same thing in right-wing politics with someone like Shapiro, because he has an entire system that you plug everything into, and it's a religious system. And so I guess in some ways I feel like I've moved beyond Ben Shapiro,
Yeah.
because I kind of understand what he's up to, not trying to be like prideful about saying that or anything, but it's almost like what he's saying is too shallow. He's making all these explicit statements, but they're not always grounded somewhere that is really safe to ground them. He's really a modernist, I would say, in a lot of ways, which is interesting too to think about in terms of him also being Orthodox Jew. Not that I know that much about Orthodox Judaism, but that's interesting to think about as well, because you have this really, really old tradition, and then you have this 300-year-old tradition, and you're kind of playing with both of them. And you can kind of see him do that he kind of ignores the religion side in most of the stuff that he talks about, I feel like, from what I remember listening to him.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting when he was in the IDW. Because when he was in that space, he had this set argument about bridging Jerusalem and Athens, and like how the West is built on that relationship and Judeo-Christian values and all of that. Like it was a very, very standard thing. It's a very modernist thing.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And it was right, but it didn't have it doesn't realize the nature of that Judeo-Christian foundation and its relation to other things. In terms of what Paul Van der Klee is talking about, of politics being a religion. And I think I would tweak it to an ideology. Because an ideology is what you have when you plug something in and you get something out.
Right.
Whereas what a religion affords is it affords the ability to extract out insight from the deeper mysteries of reality, right? And that's not static, right? That's changing depending on context, depending on your worldview, which is really what I recovered in Christianity when I started listening to Paul, especially Peugeot, because like Peugeot is really interesting to me because like Peugeot sort of does have a very formulaic way of seeing the world, but it doesn't limit what you output in terms of the ideas you have. It's expansive,
right,
instead of narrowing.
right,
To use Vervaeke.
right.
And yeah, like, and then to go back to Pearson, like what Pearson did for me that got me to move past politics was to realize that the left and the right are manifestations of fundamental parts of reality that have to work together in order to sustain anything. Yeah. And like our problem now is that both of those things are perverted. and that's going to make the whole structure kill itself.
Right. Yeah. And
Basically.
what's interesting about Peterson too that I didn't know before I listened to him is if our society was working well, I would be a liberal. Me personally, I would be a liberal. But our society is not working well. And so I'm definitely a conservative. Like it's kind of unimaginable for me to be liberal at this point, but that's because our society is really sick, you know?
Me too. Yep.
Yeah. So I don't, yeah, that it is really interesting because part of what the politics is it's just an outworking of what people think inside of themselves into the public sphere, you know, and you know, it just goes into all the policies, you know, what the people are goes into all these policies. So it's not really like politics is, you know, now you have the conservatives complaining about the liberals making politics personal, but politics is always personal so far as I can say. Like even the statement that politics should not be personal is a political statement. You know, you can't get away from it. It's just how we are. And what's interesting too is to think about America and how America is basically a modernist country, and you're not you know, you're not going to get away from that unless some major shift happens in America or it collapses. And so,
Yeah.
and I think, you know, modernity is collapsing. So one of the two is going to have to happen with America, which is kind of sad, but that's how it looks to me. And with that is just the, you know, people who are so religious about their modernity and they don't even know it, and it comes out in their modern day conservative politics.
Yeah.
Right.
And so you had a really interesting article on I think it was standardized tests. That was the first article I read from you.
Oh, okay.
And you were talking about how without modernity, mathematics as a discipline collapses.
Like, I guess I don't exactly remember.
Like, because modernity posits a world out there that we can objectively study and come to collective agreement upon, right? And so that enables you to, for example, make the universal claim that 1 + 1 = 2, because that's true out there independent of me. But once you lose that, and once but you're shoved back into your body, and that's elevated to the top, it's like 1 + 1 doesn't have to equal 2 if it doesn't line up with what I want to happen in the world, right?
Yeah.
Which was like it's one of those arguments where it's like, right now it sounds ridiculous, but I think it's right because it's seeing so far into the future
that if you don't have modernity, then 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2 exactly.
Yes, because like think about the postmodern framework, and you see this in schools, in some very far left schools, where they're saying that solving for the right answer in one way and getting one right answer is whiteness, as they call it, right? And so it's not so much that like 1 + 1 = 2 stops being true. It's just that the fact of it being true doesn't carry weight anymore, and it's more advantageous to say that 1 + 1 = 3 for the sake of power.
Yeah.
And this is exactly the point George Orwell was making. Right.
Yeah.
It's that once. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, okay. So That's really interesting. And like the first email that you sent me with correspondence theory of truth, this is, I have two meta problems, two meta things that I'm working on right now. One is this, and the second is my thesis, my senior thesis, and my thesis statement is that societal health is largely dependent on culture's relationship to magnanimous heterosexual marriage. So that's my thesis. So I have two of these things that I'm really thinking about, and then I kind of have on the back burner some things about morality. But anyways, so with truth, part of what modernity did is it said there are things out there that exist whether or not you don't. Now, it's hard for me because, and like, I'm going to say all these things, and then maybe in 2 months I would change my mind about some of them. That's kind of how this stuff goes. So forgive me for that. But kind of what I think modernity was doing is it was overreaching, because it was saying, yeah, 1 + 1 = 2, and that's all there is. And then what started to happen is, I mean, you've listened to a lot of Paul Vanderklay, basically what he calls the scientific lab leak, where it's not only 1 + 1 = 2 out there, it's 1 + 1 = 2 in here. And then you're just part of the system. And then what postmodernity is trying to do is it's trying to say, there is, not only are you not a part of the system, there is no system at all. And so what I see some Christians doing, who are modernist Christians, because most people aren't either modernists or crazy left-wing postmodernists. There's not really a lot of sensible people who aren't modernists and are also sensible, unfortunately. But is they'll say, well, the world is a machine except for you and this little part in you that's your soul. That's the only part of you that isn't part of the machine. Now, what's interesting when you bring up the thing with power is that goes back to Nietzsche, because Nietzsche says basically it's all about power. And this is how this stuff about truth connects to morality. Like, you have three major branches of philosophy, let's say ethics, metaphysics, and epistemology. All of them connect in this space, because you have what is truth exactly? Is it correspondence to the world, or is it something else? How do you know that? Secondly, and then what is that actually, what do you do with that? Because if truth is just what you will it to be, then that's what ethics is as well. And so what's interesting is I don't really know, like, our way. I have no idea what the way out of this is, because, like, if you're a straightforward postmodernist, at least how I'm defining the term, then all that there is power. And if 1 + 1 can = 3, and that will be better for you, then let 1 + 1 = 3. And you just impose your power onto the world. But it doesn't look like that's actually how it is. And if that's how it is, then you've destroyed morality, because then you're Raskolnikov, and Raskolnikov was actually right in killing the louse. There's no absolute morality outside of you. But then you have the problem of, what does it mean that there's a meaning, that 1 + 1 = 2, and what if that's meaningless? Because it seems like you have to have the person perceiving the thing for it to actually be real. And I was really thinking about this recently. Okay, so like Mr. Jones comes out on the porch and he sees a rock. Well, does he see the rock because it's there, or because of some other reason? Because in some ways he sees the rock because it's there, and he sees one rock, but there's a lot of different rocks. There's like a bunch of little rocks inside of this one big rock. And then maybe he doesn't see a rock. Maybe what he sees is a problem, because his kids left the rocks on the porch. And so now he's not seeing a bunch of little rocks or one rock, or even a problem on the porch. Now he's seeing disobedience in his children. And so you have all these things happening at once. And so you're like, okay, what does Mr. Jones know? And then what is true about this situation? And you wouldn't think that going out and seeing rocks on the porch is that complicated, but it is.
And that helps me understand what Peterson means when you see meaning. Because whether the object is a rock or any other object that his kids can use to disobey him doesn't matter to him, right? And then this is also connected with another thing that Peterson has said for ages that I only now understood this week. So Peterson he has this tentative argument he makes where he says, I don't know what reality is without consciousness. Because things like duration, color, all of these things that are built into experience disappear. And it was through Paul's commentary on the Sam Harris video where he goes back to Peterson's conversation with the Word on Fire people, where I think we have to reconsider what exists means.
Yeah,
because
that's hard.
This is what it was. It's like when you think about the Earth being 11 billion years old, there is a conscious observer built into that. Imagine that. And that's the case for everything. When you think about what a rock atomic structure looks like, you're putting an observer in there, right? And so, like, going back to the time of 11 billion years, if there is no observer, and nothing happened, right?
Right.
So if there is no observer, it's like nothing exists, because existence is presupposes a conscious observer.
Right. And that's kind of the argument of Berkeley back in the 18th century, with his, I can't remember what it's called, but I think it's idealism. It's his philosophical system, right? Yeah. I don't know. It's because part of what the Enlightenment did, and when I say Enlightenment, it's really interesting because I was thinking about this because I was watching this video where someone says, well, Enlightenment values, Enlightenment truth. And it's like, okay, are you talking about John Locke's philosophy? Because this is not David Hume Enlightenment. This is not, it's not Berkeley Enlightenment. Like a lot of what I think people mean when they say Enlightenment is like Voltaire and John Locke and some of these, those types of people who prize objective truth. But anyways, so if you take this, what the Enlightenment did is it took the person's role out of the equation, if we can even say it's an equation. That's kind of an Enlightenment way of speaking anyways. But if you take the person's role out, then you start to have subjectless truth, and you can things are only objectively true. And I don't know if that is the case. I don't know if things are true apart from a subject, like you're saying.
Yeah, because like I will grant that whatever is out there is there. Like the physical stuff is there,
right?
But like there are so duration is the biggest one for me, but like size, like distinct objects is another one. Like all of those things don't exist. Like 50% of experience goes away if consciousness isn't there. Right?
Yeah.
And when you were talking about how science removes the person from the equation and posits these objective facts, right? I think, like you said, they're not really taking the subject out of the equation, because you need the subject to see what you are looking at objectively.
Right.
And so, And like this gets into the fundamental thing that Jonathan Peugeot talks about, which is, well, it's funny because Paul and John Vervaeke and Jonathan Peugeot and Jordan Peterson all are working on this problem of
Mm-hmm.
how did unity come out of multiplicity?
Mm-hmm.
We don't know how that works, and that we really don't know how that works. And when I realized that, I became way more comfortable with the Trinity.
Mm.
It's like if we don't know how the basic act of perceiving my computer as one thing works, I'm okay with God being two persons. Like,
Yeah.
that's fine. Let me solve this first.
Yeah. And
Then
what's
I'll get
interesting,
there.
what's interesting about God being three persons is it's almost like we're all three persons
Yeah.
in some way. Like there's a spirit of who I am, and
Mhm.
there's the incarnation of who I am, and then there's something else about who I am as well that's like some ways the governing force. You have many dimensions to who you are. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, what was the thing you were asking? You said you don't have a solution for. It was like it's like being stuck between the postmodernists and their power, and the modernists and their objective reality, right?
Well, I guess to put a finer point on it, what I don't
Yeah.
have a solution for is what is truth if what correspondence theory of truth proposes as truth isn't actually truth. Like, what if it's not what corresponds to reality, then what is truth? Because I am convinced that it's not what corresponds to reality, and I'm also convinced that truth is actually real, but I don't know what it is, if that makes sense. And I feel like that gets to the modernist postmodernist divide in some ways,
because you can almost map the modernist onto the real world, quote unquote, and the postmodernist onto the mind, subjective, whatever. And then you can map that onto heaven and earth, mind. But so like part of what I want to accomplish in my higher education career is to philosophically systematize Jonathan Peugeot's work. Because I think Peugeot provides the solution to that.
Yeah.
Because,
I haven't listened to that much of him, but that's interesting.
Because you can understand Christianity as the unification of those two things, right? So if truth isn't just out there in the real world, what's out there in the real world, and it's not what I just decided to be, then it's some sort of combination between those two things. This is what Vervaeke talks about with transjectivism and all of his fancy words for it. But like in Genesis 1, God confronts potential and draws out unity. And like I've recently become way more confident in the merits of Christianity to solve the problems that our world is currently facing, especially in the domain of power.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, power decides truth.
Yeah.
How do you fix that? Self-sacrifice. That's how you fix that.
Right.
because you sacrifice yourself for the higher truth, with knowing that that will bring about the kingdom of God.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's really interesting. I feel like, Richard, we're getting into some of the stuff that we had talked about. Maybe we do
Yeah.
a second time.
Yes.
And the angel, let's say, of this conversation has been quite strange. But I don't want to kill the conversation, but I am getting text messages from my family that I need to come up and eat dinner at this time. This has been really great. I don't know if is that okay with you?
No, like this is a good place to end it. And like,
Okay. Yeah.
and I do want to do more work before
Oh,
our second conversation.
yeah. Yeah.
Because I don't know the Correspondence Theory of Truth formally. And
Okay.
like, so that article you were commenting on by Parker Sayakis, I think it was.
It was Joel Sedekase.
It was Joel Sayakis.
Yeah.
So that article he wrote on Jordan Peterson and the liar development.
Oh no, that was Parker. That was Parker. Yeah.
And then Joel was talking with Travis,
Right.
which is interesting because I actually do admin work for Travis.
Okay.
So
Yeah, Travis has asked me to do some conversations on his Discord, like lead them and then film them or stream them to his channel, but I'm like, I don't have enough time, bud. Sorry.
I did one, and then like
Okay.
I have no time to do any other ones. I'm sorry.
It's like 2 hours every single week.
Yeah.
It's like, no, sorry.
I can't. I'm sorry. They're so much fun, but anyway. But yeah, I want to put more work into that because this is like, I think this is what we're both working on.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I definitely want to talk about this. This is, the utmost of my interest at the moment intellectually. So yeah, we should definitely plan on that. And yeah, again, sorry for all the technical difficulties and everything.
No, it's all right. I just wish you luck in stringing them all together.
Oh, I hate editing so much, but I'm gonna have to do it. It'll get done. It'll just take a little while, but
no, this is so fruitful, and thank you so much, Colton, for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you for reaching out.
Yeah,
thank you so much, Richard. Yeah, so I guess we'll just talk again another time.
I'll email you in like a couple weeks.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye now.
Yeah, goodbye.